imagine that you've applied for a job, and you go in there and your prospective employer says, what can you do? And you say, I have good handwriting and I can recite the 17 times tables. Now, about 100 years ago, if you said those two things, you would get the job. Because you needed good handwriting and you needed to be able to do arithmetic in your head, because the school was going to produce people who would fit into a gigantic bureaucratic administrative machine, a computer made up of people. Everybody had to be identical. Everybody had to get 50 out of 100 in everything and fit in. But today you won't get that job. Today, we've actually got computers, real computers, which are made up of little pieces of electronics. So guess what? We can be people again. So I kind of bumped into all this through a set of experiments called Hole in the Wall. And it was called Hole in the Wall because it involved putting computers embedded into walls and buildings and that sort of thing, and left for children to play with. And they had the internet on it. And what was surprising in those days was that we found that children would actually be able to operate all that. Children who had never seen a computer before or who didn't know any English would actually learn to operate computers and do, Google searches in about 4 months' time. And it was very surprising at that time. Not so surprising now because, 2.5-year-olds learn how to use an iPad by themselves. But it was quite surprising then. Here's a sort of a brief glimpse of that. So that's my very first experiment. On the right, this 8-year-old boy. On his left, his student, 6-year-old girl. And he was teaching her how to browse. But none of them go to school or know English or anything. More of these experiments. So all unsupervised and things that they'd kind of taught themselves, which was unusual. So we measured all of this and discovered that groups of children, if given a computer connected to the internet and left for a while, in a 9-month period would become or would learn to do what the average office secretary in the West does. So in those days, that raised a lot of questions about what's training then in this environment. What does it all mean? And I wasn't really very sure of anything other than the fact that this happens. Every time you do it, it happens. Then I started to watch the children, see what would they do if I continued with this, if I left the computer there. And on the average, about 4 months down the line, they run into Google. And they start Googling their homework. And the slum teachers in Delhi, New Delhi, where I was doing this, they started saying, the children have changed a lot. Their English has become near perfect. and the quality of their work is very deep and so on. So, and I was thinking to myself, my God, what have I done? Because, is this learning? And guess what? About 7 years later, I would get the answer to that question, is it learning? And I would get it, of all places, from northeastern England. I continued to see how far children would go with this kind of self-organized behavior. I called it minimally invasive or self-organized learning. Amongst the many experiments, there was one school in Hyderabad in southern India where the problem was of English pronunciation. The children were going to school, they were learning English, but the English was taught by these local language speakers, Telugu-speaking teachers. So the children would pick up their accent, When they apply for a job, then the interview board says, your English is very good, but we can't quite understand what you're saying. So that didn't help much. So I thought, well, let me tackle that problem. And I did that by giving the children a computer with a speech-to-text engine on it. Asked them to talk into the computer. So they spoke, and the computer typed complete nonsense. So the children said it doesn't understand anything that what we're saying. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll leave this computer here, and I'll go away. And you have to make yourselves understood. So the children said, how? And I invented my first pedagogical principle. I said, I have no idea. And I left them with the computer. When I came back, I saw this little fellow outside the classroom, outside of the school. So I said to him in English, I said, Faizan, how are you? And Faizan looks up at me and says, fantastic. So I said, good Lord, what's happening here? So I went in and I found that they had downloaded something called the Speaking Oxford Dictionary. The dictionary would say words to them. They would repeat the words back to the computer and check if the computer was typing it right. And they would correct each other's pronunciation. In other words, they had invented pedagogy, which is what teachers are supposed to do. Well, here's a little look at that.
Yes, he's my cousin.
Yes, he's my cousin.
Yes, he's my cousin.
Okay, they compare each other's, but all invented by themselves. And by the way, several of these little girls, you guys might have you might actually know them because two of them work in call centers in Hyderabad. Might have tried to sell you a credit card. So I continued, and about 7 years ago, Newcastle University called me and said, we've got a large research grant to improve schooling in India. And we think you should head this and you should help with this. So I came over to Newcastle. In Newcastle, the question which the faculty asked was, how far can this go? Are you trying to say that this can impact schooling? So I didn't have an answer to that. And I decided to find out. I made a research question. The research question was, can Tamil-speaking 12-year-old children in an Indian village learn the biotechnology of DNA replication in English from a roadside computer on their own? And I thought this is an excellent social science question. I would give them an examination to start with. They would get a 0. I would come back after a couple of months, give them an examination again. They would get another 0. I would go back to Newcastle and say, we need teachers. I found a village, and they already had a hole-in-the-wall computer, so I downloaded some material off the internet on genetics, DNA, and how it reproduces. The children came rushing in and said, so what are you doing? Are you installing a game? I said, no, it's not a game. It's something very interesting, but I'm afraid it's all in English. So the children took a look and said, well, how can we understand this? This is terrible. It's got big words in it, chemistry. So I used my pedagogical principle, and I said, I have no idea, actually, how you'll understand it. And anyway, I'm going away. So, so I left them. I came back after 2 months. The children marched in and said, we've understood nothing. So I said, well, what do you expect? So how did you come to that conclusion? So they said, no, we look at it every day. So I said, you look at it every day, but you don't understand a thing. Why do you look at it anyway? So one little girl then says to me, well, apart from the fact that improper replication of the DNA molecule causes genetic disease, we've understood nothing else. Here she is. That's a village called Kali Kuppam. It changed my life, actually.
First, your phone. See, do cell types. Neuron.
Where is it? Where is it? Neuron?
Neuron cell death and communication.
That last bit, I didn't get the camera angle right, but what she was saying was neurons communicate with their hands like that. The dendrites. So I came back, I measured, and they had gone from 0 to 30% in 2 months. It's utter educational impossibility if you look at the circumstances. But I couldn't go back to England with these results because 30% in the Victorian system is a fail. So how do I get them another 20 marks? I can't get a teacher over there. What I did find was a young girl who was a great friend of the children, and she used to, and I told her, can you teach some more biotechnology? She said no. I didn't have any science in school. I have no idea what these kids are doing under that tree with their computer all day long. I can't help you. So I said at that point, I don't know why I thought of it that way, I said, use the method of the grandmother. So she says, what's that? I said, stand behind them, and every time they do anything, just say, wow, fantastic, how did you do that? Can you do a bit more? When I was your age, I could never have done anything like that. So she did that for 2 months. The scores jumped to 50%. The children in Kuppam had caught up with my control school in New Delhi with a trained biotechnology teacher, a rich private school. So when I saw that graph, I thought to myself, there's another way. We've missed it all along, but there is another way. So I came back to Newcastle looking for grandmothers. I put out a request in the local papers saying, if you are a British grandmother, if you have broadband and a web camera, then can you give me 1 hour of your time per week for free? In the first 2 weeks, I got 200. I know more British grandmothers than anybody. So what happens in northeastern England, in the schools that I'm working with, is that children research big questions by themselves. If they need help, whether in northeastern England or whether in southern India, I have what's called the granny cloud. The granny cloud sits up on the internet. And whenever there's a child in trouble, we beam a gran. And she goes over Skype and appears on his wall. You'll see a bit of that.
And Sugata's new teaching methods have now also arrived on these shores. The lessons learned from his very first experiment in India with hole-in-the-wall computers are now being applied to schools in Gateshead.
Stephen? Bonjour,
The
good.
process is that you take a group of children, you ask them to make groups of 4. Each group of 4 is allowed to use one computer with an internet connection. And then you trigger off the system with a question. That question is absolutely critical.
What I want you to find out for me today is, where does language come from? I don't know the answer.
Where are you going to start looking?
I'm going to skip ahead. What happened next was basically they explored and they came to anthropology and they figured out where language came from. They were working, these kids, easily 10 years ahead of their time. Do they retain this? Yes, they do. I have measurements now which show that they retain it for years and years because they found it out for themselves. I started working with children in poorer areas of northeastern England, and I saw that I could change their aspirations by showing them TED Talks and then having them research what they've seen in the TED Talk. Between Google, Skype, and TED, the children could be lifted a decade ahead of their time. I'll just go one step ahead. So what I'm creating right now are called self-organized learning environments. They're like little cyber cafes for children. What I'm going to do is to have such facilities set up in really remote places where you cannot build schools. They'll be standalone facilities operated entirely by the granny cloud over the internet. Just to get a little glimpse of that, I started the first of these experiments about 3 years ago.
That's right, as fast as you can. As fast as you can. You can't catch me. You say it. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. Well done, very good. So again.
It's like 5,000 miles apart. So what do we need to build a school in the cloud? Well, I need free electricity and I need free broadband. I think children all over the planet should have free electricity and free broadband. I need a curriculum which is made up of big questions. What do I mean by a big question? Well, question that children will engage with. So for example, if you want to teach a class about cell expression, biological cell expression, if you say, children, today we're going to do biological cell expression, they'll fall asleep. Instead of that, what you can say is, guess what, I have a question. Why is it that women cannot grow beards? Try it. It'll get you cell expression very quickly. Okay. Self-organized and a fault-tolerant technology, things that repair themselves. Self-organized examination, self-organized assessment. We don't want to produce clerks. We want to produce people. Who can make people? The people can make people. And finally, if we can do this over the cloud, then it can be anywhere, under any circumstance. We could eventually level the playing field. And that would, I think, change the world. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Sugata, that was fantastic, really fantastic. And what you didn't reveal is that when you went to Newcastle, you went and did what all academics do. You went and lived in a cluster of posh houses out on the edge of town, and you went walking in the wilds. And now you've moved to Gateshead, and you live in a miner's cottage next door to an alcoholic, and on the other side, what's the other guy?
Never mind, he might be listening to this.
He might be listening. And even if he's not, you might tell him to find out what you said, which you'd probably be able to find out too.
Well, it's a different England. If any of you ever want to visit, then come on over. I'll show you a proper pony and trap, and you can get a ride up to the university from my house for about 20 quid.
The point is, you go into the schools in that area around you, some of the poorer areas, and I'm wondering, how radical does the reset in education have to be? At the moment, the kids sit at desks, they have a teacher in front of them, there may be a few computers in the classroom. Where do we go from there?
Well, I think it's mostly a question of how you think about education, and whether what I started this talk with by saying that we are being prepared to fit a machine that doesn't exist anymore or is on its way out.
But that's clear, but I want to find out what the classroom looks like. I mean, do I go to school anymore?
You do. You go to a school which looks like a children's club, like a cyber cafe for children. It's got computers, but it's not one computer per child.
How do I test each individual child to ensure that they are each progressing to a point of delivery?
You simply measure who is progressing in what subject and up to what extent. So it's possible that I might have progressed a lot in painting, and I do terribly in mathematics. Well, we live in a world where that's all right.
Yeah, but there's going to have to be intervention at some point, isn't there?
Yes, and that's why I have those grannies. So the intervention is in the form of admiration.
But it's not hello, granny, goodbye, teacher.
No, of course not. The teacher has a big job. The teacher's job is to create the big questions, which will drive the whole system.
Now, at the moment, you can see that by having clusters of 4 or 5 around one computer, you have human interaction. There's no danger of being burrowed into the computer. But if once you give everybody an iPad, which will come soon enough, then they become surely much more myopic. They become much more burrowed into the computer and no longer relate to each other. Or do they?
Well, I mean, that's not just children. It's all of us spend most of our lives now staring at our thighs, like that. So even couples sitting next to each other do that. So that's something we have to fix. But in my
But
method,
the danger is that at least that doesn't happen until you're about 15. But now you're talking about a situation in which it'll start happening at 2.5.
except in the school, if they follow my method, because in the school, the whole method is about talking to each other, clustering around the computer.
The incredible thing is that your map, in the end, doesn't depend on computing. It depends on electricity.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
So in many ways, the investment has now to be in alternative forms of energy production on a scale we've never dreamt of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking at solar as that possible solution.
But then how do you also deliver the technology, the iPad? It's never going to come down to $5 an iPad, is it?
It will. It probably will. It'll probably be, if I look 25 years ahead, it'll probably be free in some form or the other, like a ballpoint pen is.
You mean you will come out of the maternity unit carrying an iPad?
Unless you're born with it inside your head.
The state will provide you an iPad as you come out of the hospital.
It may not exist as a physical device, It just might be inside somewhere.
Not a buried chip.
Yeah, well, not necessarily there. It could be in your kidney or somewhere, but it
Well, I think on that adventurous thought, thank you very, very, very much for a fantastically uplifting talk.
Thank you.